So today as we move on, we'll once again be looking at sampling, but this time round we'll be looking at non-random sampling. So there's a couple of non-random sampling techniques for us to get familiar with, and today we're going to start with quota sampling. Now, quota sampling is very similar to stratified sampling in that we have strata and we've tried to split the whole population up into these distinctive categories. But there's one specific difference. The sample structure doesn't necessarily follow the population structure. We saw that the sample being representative of the population was a big thing for stratified samples, but this time round we could choose to have the same number from each category if we wanted to. We could choose to have more of one than the other if we wanted to, and that's regardless of the original population structure. It's like if we wanted to interview some people at a workplace, let's say a financial company, and actually in this company there's more women than men, but we decide that we want to interview 5 women and 5 men. So our sample group didn't represent the population, but we got what we needed. We needed some opinions from the women and we needed some opinions from the men. So that's a quota sample. Well, if we get back to this example around these cars, our 4 categories, our 4 strata are the colours, the black, red, purple and blue. And I'm going to decide I'm going to take a sample of 12, so I'll take 3 from each of those groups. Now, the way that I actually pick the sampling units can be at random, or actually the interviewer can just have a free choice and pick whichever ones they want. What I'll do is I'll just go through them in sequential order, and if I have an unfilled quota, I will include that vehicle in my sample. Let's see how that works out. So as I look at the list sequentially, the first car is black and I'm interested in using that in my sample. Same for the second car and the third car. All 3 of them are now in my sample. But the 4th car, I've already filled my quota of black cars, so I'm not really interested in including this one in the sample. The 5th car's red, I'll include that. I'm going to take the purple car and I'm going to take these 2 blues. None of the rest of the blacks am I really interested in. As I get to car number 12, that's a red car number 13, I'll take, and car number 14, I'll take. 15, I've already filled my quota of blue cars. Let's just stop here and check what's happened for a second. Firstly, I've reached my quota for black and blue coloured vehicles. All I'm really looking for is 1 more red and 1 more purple. As I read along the next line, I'm actually ignoring all of these black ones until I get to number 21, which is a red car. And 22 is a purple car. And at this point, I've filled all of my quotas. So I've generated my sample and I'm happy to go ahead and make use of that. The advantages of using a quota sample are that a small sample can actually be representative of the population, as in each of the strata, each of the categories is represented within my sample. I don't even need a sampling frame. I used one in my example, but it's not necessary. I could have just pointed at the first 3 black cars that I saw, first 3 red, etc. It's quick, it's easy, and it's inexpensive. Additionally, a quota sample helps you to make comparisons between those different categories within your population, between those different strata within your population. As I said earlier, I could just make a comparison between the views of the women and the views of the men, no matter what their proportion was within the population. The disadvantages start with the fact that this is not even a random sampling technique, and as soon as it's not a random sampling technique, there's an opportunity for bias to be introduced. The way that I picked the sampling units was to go through the list, the sampling frame, and I just picked the first 3 of each colour that I came across. Well, if that list was ordered from the newest cars to the oldest cars, I would get a misrepresentation of how good the car was, because I was looking at the newest and I wasn't taking into account the fact that there were much older vehicles that should have been included in the sample as well. So then I'll probably overestimate the quality of the cars. The fact that I have strata or categories is actually a disadvantage as well, because I actually need to make sure that I pick those to be non-overlapping, mutually exclusive strata or categories, which is sometimes difficult, as we've discussed previously. Another disadvantage is just scalability, in as much that if I wanted to have a more in-depth look to the data, I would have much more overlapping groups or more distinct groups that I would then need to consider and try to represent. And that process of considering these more distinct groups starts to add expense and starts to add time costs to the actual investigation. And the final one, and this is a bit of a tricky one, is that non-responses are not recorded. Now, if I took a simple random sample and somebody didn't really want to give answers to the questions that I was asking, I would actually end up just having one less piece of data to use. I had one less respondent that was cooperating with the investigation. However, in a quota sample, because of the way that I picked the sampling units in the first place, it's a little bit easier to just swap out someone who's not responding for somebody else just to fill my quota. As I said, I definitely needed 3 of each. So if somebody drops out, I can just fill them in with somebody else. It's easier and simpler to do in a quota sample because there wasn't so much structure to the way that I selected the sampling units in the first place. Okay, and we're just about finished, but before you move on to some practice questions, let's take a quick look at the specification and exactly what it is that students are expected to be able to show, exactly what the examiners are anticipating you will be confident on. While you read through that, I want to quickly remind you that it will be sensible for you to come back and watch this video at a later date, maybe come back in 2 or 3 weeks or before an assessment, and as you watch through the second time round, because you've done your practice, a lot of what you go through here should resonate with you much more. And you have a chance to really embed your understanding of the difficult concepts, the ones that have been flagged up as A-star.